Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate my friend Rob Woodall so much. I mean, what clarity. We lost a good man when John Linder didn't run again, and we gained a good man when Rob Woodall ran for that seat. So it's a day. Well, there's a matter of concern. Let me just say this. We have forgotten God. We have forgotten the gracious hand which preserved us in peace and multiplied and enriched and strengthened us. And we have vainly imagined in the deceitfulness of our hearts that all these blessings were produced by some superior wisdom and virtue of our own. Intoxicated with unbroken success, we have become too self-sufficient to feel the necessity of redeeming and preserving grace, too proud to pray to the God that made us. It behooves us then to humble ourselves before the offended power, to confess our national sins, and to pray for clemency and forgiveness. Now, there's some people these days that say it's not appropriate to mention God, that has no place in government. Yet, the very God that I speak of and those very words that I spoke are not from me. They are from 152 years ago. Abraham Lincoln didn't just say those words. He made that his presidential proclamation on March 30th, 1863. He called for the nation to have a national day, and these are his words, of humiliation, fasting, and prayer. So he made that official proclamation. So sometimes my office starts getting calls if I mention the three-letter word that some find to be such a heinous word to use on the House floor, even though it was one of the most used and was most called upon names, certainly, in our Congress for the first 150, 175 years or so. The Bible was the most quoted book for most of our history. So the problem is those people that will call and email irate about a member of the United States Congress saying we have forgotten God, we've forgotten the gracious hand which preserved us in peace and multiplied and enriched and strengthened us, and we have vainly imagined in the deceitfulness of our hearts that all these blessings were produced by some superior wisdom and virtue of our own. That was Abraham Lincoln that said those, and he didn't just say them, they were an official proclamation of the United States of America. So this day and time, it's more popular to issue executive orders as if one person in our government were God. But Abraham Lincoln knew better. 2 years later, he was assassinated. He could have done so much to bring this country together after the worst war the country had ever faced. And yet his life was cut short 150 years ago. An extraordinary man, extraordinary time. But he tells us with his written word that we have forgotten God. He said, we're too proud to pray to the God who made us. Some find that offensive. Some think the government should be God. The government should tell people, you can see this doctor, but you can't see this doctor. This doctor may be able to heal you, but you can't see this doctor. Why? Because we're the government and we're the new God. Seniors, look, we know you had plans for health care to last longer, but sorry, you don't get as good a health care as you did 5 years ago. In my own family, my dad is not going to get the same health care my mother did that kept her alive 15 more years after her tumor was discovered. As Dad told me last week, I'm not going to be able to have the health care your mother got because of Medicare and all these cuts. I can't even have the option to do what we did for your mother. Well, that's what happens when the government becomes God. Unfortunately, if we were going to have the government become the God of the United States, it would be nice if the government were a little more truthful, a little more honest, a little more just. But one of the major problems that's been revealed recently is the fact that Department of Homeland Security has lied to a United States district judge in Texas. He was told that because he was an injunction and was issuing an injunction that there would be no 3-year amnesty provided, that the president spoke into being, and after he spoke into being, the new law overriding with his very oral words the laws that were passed by the House and Senate, signed into law by other presidents. Disregard those. Then the Secretary of Homeland Security, Jay Johnson, wrote memos overriding laws that were worked on in committees, brought to the floor of the House, debated, fussed over, eventually voted and approved in the House, debated, fussed over, eventually passed in the Senate, signed into law by another president. We disregard that because the government is God now. We don't need to pray to anybody except Washington these days. Well, some of us believe the government is not God. Nobody wants a dishonest God. And we've had too much of that from Washington. So, with recent revelations about the Department of Homeland Security and its failures, many Americans have become gravely concerned that their actions and performance is causing additional misrepresentations. And that's why it was critically important that we have a thorough investigation of the Department of Homeland Security. There were misrepresentations by the prior director of Homeland Security before our committee. Talked about those previously. But the American people deserve to be protected by their government, not spied on, not lied to, not pay to have Department of Homeland Security ignore the law. So there were 22 of us that just signed a letter going to the Comptroller General of the United States. Some pronounce it comptroller because that's how it's spelled. As my late English teacher mother told me many years ago, that maybe the way it's spelled, if you look at the dictionary, which I was forced to do, then you'll see that it's actually pronounced, the number one pronunciation is controller, but because of usage, I don't know, I hadn't looked recently, maybe number one now is comptroller, but it didn't used to be. But to the Comptroller General Dodaro, this is what the letter that 22 of us sent yesterday. As you know, on November 20th, 2014, the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Jay Johnson, issued a series of memoranda affecting federal immigration law, including in the new DHS policy directives as was an order to extend and expand the existing Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, as well as an order to establish a new program that provides for work authorization permits to an estimated 5 million undocumented immigrants residing in the United States. The program was termed the Deferred Action for Parents of Americans in Lawful Permanent Residence, or DAPA. U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services is the federal agency that adjudicates applications for immigration benefits. This agency's website claims a workforce of 19,000 people operating throughout 223 offices worldwide with an annual operating budget of $4 billion. This agency is very unique from many other agencies. According to its own FY16 USCIS budget request, 96.8% of the agency's annual operating budget comes from fees collected from applicants for most types of immigration benefits, from petitions to sponsor relatives or employees, to replacement cards, to naturalization applications. These fee-based revenues appear to be considered permanently appropriated mandatory funds compared to annual discretionary appropriations which apply to federal agencies. As a result, this permanently appropriated mandatory spending allotment for USCIS falls outside the annual appropriations process. While Congress determines the categories of aliens that are to be admitted in the United States, it does not always set the fees USCIS charges or constructively control how USCIS allocates its resources. This fee-generated portion of its annual budget, translating to $3.874 billion in FY16, appears to be completely fungible. That is, this money raised for one purpose can perhaps be used for other purposes. This arrangement creates the potential for USCIS to, in effect, create slush funds for other purposes and skim off congressionally authorized fees imposed on legal immigrants and their sponsors in order to fund programs that may not be specifically authorized by Congress. Mr. Joseph Moore, the Chief Financial Officer of USCIS, testified in a Senate hearing on March 3rd of 2015 that the agency determines the fees it charges based on a practice known as activity-based costing. Thus, transaction fees are proportional to the amount of time and resources to fulfill that transaction. However, records indicate that USCIS has a carryover balance from excess revenues at the end of FY14 of approximately $1.27 billion. Mr. Moore claimed that he seeks to maintain a rolling reserve balance of about $600 million to cover unexpected costs and surge activity. He further stated that funds from this account help USCIS handle early spending in response to the executive actions. Eventually, new fees paid by illegal immigrant applicants are intended to replenish that account, plus cover all the new costs. What is not clear is why or how the agency has built up reserves of more than twice the amount it says it aims to keep for contingency requirements. This draws scrutiny as to how long this practice has occurred, for what reasons, what can or cannot be done with the money, and ultimately how Congress can effectively conduct oversight. Experts refer to this arrangement where an agency can skim off or tax certain types of applications in order to fund others as cross-subsidization. Currently, fees from legal immigrants and their sponsors subsidize refugees and asylum applicants applications, military naturalizations, the anti-fraud division, and other activities, with other activities being broadly defined. So we go on and ask for the Comptroller General to audit the Department of Homeland Security because we haven't gotten truthful answers. We haven't gotten complete answers. It appears we have a shadow government in existence that can go across the river and lease or purchase, spend tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars, we don't know, without any accountability to anybody. It moves toward being like a Kafka novel of just a completely unaccountable mammoth government that no individual can ever take on. That was never the intention of the founders, nor those who have given their lives throughout the history of this, the greatest country in the history of the world. So we're calling for an audit. We're asking the GAO to audit USCIS and find out critically needed answers. Homeland Security agencies continue to be hindered by leadership that breaks the law and ignores the Constitution while using highly suspect spending practices. It's got to stop. And we got to know exactly what they're doing so that we can get them back with acting within the constitutional requisites. Because the Department of Homeland Security has been so obsessed, as directed by the President, with having open borders, bringing in illegal immigrants. As one Border Patrolman told me, we in Homeland Security are called logistics by the drug cartels, the gangs, all those people that bring in illegal aliens into the United States, like the commercial that's widely seen on television. Logistics, they're referring to, are the fact that they can bring people into the United States illegally, the drug cartels, the gangs, for a huge whopping fee. And once they get them into the United States, they can count on Homeland Security to spend this money that many trying to do things the right way, the legal way, are paying to have their immigration, their visa, the application expedited. We don't know where those expedited fees are going, but their visas, their applications are not really being expedited. So it would appear probably the Homeland Security Department is taking fees that are being paid for one thing by people wanting to do things the right way, the legal way, the constitutional way, and Homeland Security is hurting the law and the Constitution and spending it on people who keep coming in, pouring in naturally, illegally, because they're taken care of. Homeland Security will ship them around the country. All you got to do is come in. We'll give you a hearing date some years in the future, ship you off, and don't worry about showing up for your hearings. How long can a country last doing these kind of absurd governmental actions? I mean, it's insane. The book that will be written about the rise and fall of the United States will be very easy to write. These things are not new. They're very predictable. That when a country starts ignoring the law, then it becomes lawless. And it's not long before the people take up that position and the country becomes a terrible place to live. This country became the greatest country in the history of the world. More freedoms, more personal assets. And now we see that being frittered away by a government that's being allowed to do so. And at the same time, the head of the government is